China in antiquity. The dawn of Chinese civilization. According to Chinese legend, Chinese society was founded by a series of rulers who brought the first rudiments of civilization to the region nearly 5,000 years ago. The first was Fu Shi, the ox tamer, who knotted cords for hunting and fishing, domesticated animals, and introduced the beginnings of family life. For an explanation regarding the translation of the Chinese written language, see A Note to Students About Language and the Dating of Time, which was a previous reading. The second was Shen Nung. Shen Nung, the divine farmer, who bent wood for plows and hewed wood for plowshares. He taught the people the techniques of agriculture. Last came Huang Di, the Yellow Emperor, who strung a piece of wood for the bow and whittled little sticks of wood for the arrows. Legend credits Huang Di with creating the Chinese system of writing, as well as inventing the bow and arrow. Modern historians do not accept the literal accuracy of such legends, but view them instead as part of the process whereby early peoples attempt to make sense of their world and their role in it. Nevertheless, such recreations of a mythical past often contain an element of truth, although there is no clear evidence that the three sovereigns actually existed. Again, that was Fu Shi, Shen Nung, and Huang Di. Their achievements do symbolize some of the defining characteristics of Chinese civilization: the interaction between nomadic and agricultural peoples, the importance of the family as the basic unit of Chinese life, and the development of a unique system of writing. The land and people of China. Although human communities have existed in China for several 100,000 years, the first Homo sapiens arrived in the area sometime after 40,000 BCE as a part of the Great Migration out of Africa. Around the 8th millennium BCE, the early peoples living along the riverbanks of the northern and central China began to master the cultivation of crops. A number of these early agricultural settlements were in the neighborhood of the Yellow River, where they gave birth to two Neolithic or New Stone Age societies known to archaeologists as the Yangshou or Yangshao and the Longshan cultures, sometimes identified in terms of their pottery as the painted and black pottery cultures, respectively. Similar communities began to appear in the Yangtze Valley in central China and along the coast to the south. The southern settlements were based on the cultivation of rice rather than dry crops such as millet, barley, and wheat. The last was an import from the Middle East in the 2nd millennium BCE, but they were as old as those in the north. Thus, agriculture and perhaps other elements of early civilization, again, things that characterize civilization, may have developed spontaneously in several areas of China rather than radiating outward from one central region. At first, these simple Neolithic communities were hardly more than villages. But as the inhabitants mastered the rudiments of agriculture, they gradually gave rise to more sophisticated and complex societies. In a pattern that we have already seen elsewhere, civilization gradually spread from these nuclear settlements in the valleys of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers to other lowland areas of eastern and central China. The two great river valleys, you can see them on the map, and the areas of early human settlement, then can be considered the core regions in the development of Chinese civilization. And so, like the ancient civilizations that arose in North Africa and Western Asia, Chinese society emerged along the banks of two major river systems, the Yellow and the Yangtze. China was separated from the other civilizations by snow-capped mountains and forbidding deserts. However, and thus was compelled to develop essentially on its own, isolated, without context from other societies going through a similar process. Although these densely cultivated valleys eventually became two of the great food-producing areas of the ancient world, China is more than a land of fertile fields. In fact, only 12% of the total land area is arable, compared with 23% in the United States of land mass area. Much of the remainder consists of mountains and deserts that ring the country on its northern and western fronts. Again, you have the Yellow Sea to the east. To the west of China, you have Xinjiang and Tibet, with the Himalayas and the far west, and the Gobi Desert to the far north, and then the city of Banpo next to the Yellow River. The often arid and forbidding landscape is a dominant feature of Chinese life and has played a significant role in Chinese history. The geographic barriers served to isolate the Chinese people from advanced agrarian societies in other parts of Asia. The frontier region of the Gobi Desert, Central Asia, and the Tibetan Plateau were sparsely inhabited by peoples of Mongolian, Indo-European, or Turkish extraction. Most were pastoral societies, and like the contacts between other ancient river valley civilizations and their neighbors, relations between the other ancient river valley civilizations and their neighbors, relations between the Chinese and the steppe people were intermittent and frequently unstable. Sometimes the two sides engaged in productive trade relations, swapping grain and manufactured goods for hides and other animal products. On other occasions, however, mutual suspicion and contrasting interests led to conflict. Although less numerous than the Chinese, many of the people along the frontiers possessed impressive skills in war and were sometimes aggressive in seeking wealth or territory in the settled regions south of the Gobi Desert. Over the next 2,000 years, the northern frontier became one of the great fault lines of conflict in Asia as Chinese armies attempted to protect precious farmlands from marauding people from beyond the frontier. In turn, nomadic people often took offense at Chinese efforts to encroach on their grazing lands. When China was unified and blessed with capable rulers, it could usually keep the nomadic intruders at bay and even bring them under a loose form of Chinese administration. But in times of internal weakness, China was vulnerable to attack from the north, and on several occasions, nomadic peoples succeeded in overthrowing native Chinese rulers and setting up their own dynastic regimes. From other directions, China normally had little to fear. To the east lay the China Sea, a lair for pirates and the source of powerful typhoons that occasionally ravaged the Chinese coast, but otherwise rarely a source of concern. South of the Yangtze River was a hilly region inhabited by a mixture of peoples of varied linguistic and ethnic stock who lived by farming, fishing, or food gathering. They were gradually absorbed in the inexorable expansion of Chinese civilization. The Shang Dynasty. The Shang Dynasty, historians of China have traditionally dated the beginning of Chinese civilization to the founding of the Xia dynasty more than 4,000 years ago. Although the precise date for the rise of the Xia is in dispute, recent archaeological evidence confirms its existence, however. Legend maintains that the founder was a ruler named Yu, who is also credited with introducing irrigation and draining the floodwaters that periodically threatened to inundate the North China plain. The Xia dynasty was replaced by a second dynasty, that called the Shang, around the 6th century BCE. The late Shang capital at Anyang, just north of the Yellow River in north-central China, has been excavated by archaeologists. Among the finds were thousands of so-called oracle bones, ox and chicken bones, or turtle shells that were used by the Shang rulers for divination and to communicate with the gods. The inscriptions on these oracle bones are the earliest known form of Chinese writing and provide much of our information about the beginnings of civilization in China. They describe a culture gradually emerging from the Neolithic, or the New Stone Age, to the early Bronze Age. Again, bronze is a combination of copper and tin. Political organization. China under the Shang dynasty was a predominantly agricultural society ruled by an aristocratic class, whose major occupation was war and control over key resources such as metals and salt. One ancient chronicler complained that, quote, "the big affairs of state consist of sacrifice and soldiery," end quote. Combat was carried on by means of two-horse chariots. The appearance of chariots in China in the mid-2nd millennium BCE coincides roughly with similar developments elsewhere, leading some historians to suggest that the Shang ruling dynasty may originally have invaded China from elsewhere in Asia. But items found in Shang burial mounds are similar to Longshan pottery, implying that the Shang ruling elites were linear descendants of the indigenous Neolithic peoples in the area. If that was indeed the case, the Shang may have acquired their knowledge of horse-drawn chariots through contact with the peoples of neighboring regions. Some recent support for that assumption has come from evidence unearthed in the sandy waste of Xinjiang, China's far northwestern province. There, archaeologists have discovered corpses dating back as early as the 2nd millennium BCE with physical characteristics resembling those of Europeans. They are also clothed in textiles similar to those worn at the time in Europe, suggesting that they may have been members of an Indo-European migration from areas much farther to the west. If that is the case, they were probably familiar with advances in chariot making that occurred a few hundred years earlier in southern Russia and Kazakhstan. By about 2000 BCE, spoked wheels were being deposited at grave sites in Ukraine and also in the Gobi Desert, just north of the Great Bend of the Yellow River. It is thus likely that the new technology, that of spoked wheels, became available to the founders of the Shang dynasty and may have aided their rise to power in northern China. The Shang king ruled with the assistance of a central bureaucracy in the capital city. His realm was divided into a number of territories governed by aristocratic chieftains, but the king appointed these chieftains and could apparently depose them at his very will. He was also responsible for the defense of the realm and controlled large armies that often fought on the fringes of the kingdom. The transcendent importance of the ruler was graphically displayed in the ritual sacrifices undertaken at his death, when hundreds of his retainers were buried with him in the royal tomb. As the inscriptions on the oracle bones make clear, the Shang ruling elite believed in the existence of supernatural forces and thought that they should communicate with those forces in order to obtain divine intervention on matters of this world. In fact, the main purpose of the oracle bones seemed to have been to communicate with the gods. Supreme among the heavenly forces was the sky god, known as Ti. Evidence from the oracle bones also suggests that the king was already being viewed as an intermediary between heaven and earth. An early Shang character for king consists of 3 horizontal lines connected by a single vertical line. The middle horizontal line represents the king's place between human society and the divine forces in nature. The early Chinese also had a clear sense of life in the hereafter, though some of the human sacrifices discovered in the royal tombs were presumably intended to propitiate the gods, others were meant to accompany the king or members of his family on the journey to the next world. From this conviction would come the concept of veneration of ancestors, mistakenly known in the Western world as ancestor worship, and the practice, which continues to the present day in many Chinese communities, of burning replicas of physical objects to accompany the departed on their journey to the next world. Again, the veneration of ancestors does not mean that they worshipped their ancestors. The social structures in early China. In the Neolithic period, the farming village was apparently the basic social unit of China, at least in the core region of the Yellow River Valley. Villages were organized by clans rather than by nuclear family units, and all residents probably took the common clan name of the entire village. In some cases, a village may have included more than one clan. At Banpo, or Panpo, and again, Panpo is right there to the east of the Yellow River, about the center part of the Yellow River, between Xinjiang and China. But at Panpo, an archaeological site near the modern city of Xi'an that dates back to at least 7,000 years, the houses in that village are separated by a ditch, which some scholars think may have served as a divider between 2 clans. The individual dwellings at Panpo housed nuclear families, but a larger building in the village was apparently used as a clan meeting hall. The clan-based origins of Chinese society may help explain the continued importance of the joint family in traditional China. as well as the relatively small number of family names in Chinese society. Even today, there are only about 400 commonly used names. For example, there are only 400 commonly used names in a society of more than 1 billion people, and a colloquial expression for the common people in China today is the old 100 names. By Shang times, the classes were becoming increasingly differentiated. It is likely that some poorer peasants did not own their farms, but they were obliged to work the land of the chieftain and other elite families in the village. Aristocrats not only made war and served as officials. Indeed, the first Chinese character for official originally meant warrior, but they were also the primary landowners. In addition to the aristocratic elite and the peasants, there were a small number of merchants and artisans, as well as slaves, probably consisting primarily of criminals or prisoners taken in battle. The Shang are perhaps the best known for their mastery of the art of casting bronze. Utensils, weapons, and ritual objects made of bronze have been found in royal tombs in urban centers throughout the area known to be under Shang influence. It is also clear that the Shang had achieved a fairly sophisticated writing system that would eventually spread throughout East Asia and evolve into the written language that is still used in China today. The Shang dynasty. China's mother culture. Until recently, the prevailing wisdom among historians, both Chinese and non-Chinese, was that the Yellow River Valley was the ancient heartland of Chinese civilization, and that the technological and cultural achievements gradually radiated from there to other areas in East Asia. Here it was thought occurred the first technological breakthroughs, including the development of a writing system, advanced farming techniques, and the ability to make bronze ritual vessels. Supporting this idea was the fact that the first significant archaeological finds in China, including the last Shang capital at Anyang, were made in that region. Today, this diffusion hypothesis, as it sometimes is called, is no longer so widely accepted. The remains of early agricultural communities have now been unearthed in the Yangtze River Valley and along the southern coast, and a rich trove of bronze vessels has been discovered in grave sites in central Sichuan province. Such finds suggest that although the Yellow River civilization may have taken the lead in some areas, such as complex political organization and the development of writing, similar advances were already underway in other parts of China.